Hi, good morning and welcome everyone. Uh, this is our new class beginning on 2021 spring term for Lordland College. And as early church history one. Early church history itself, it could be several different quarter worth of studies. As we pursue like 10 weeks class for a quarter. So early church history, I'll try to cover the very beginning of a church. And the subtitle is Relevant Readings from the Four Gospels. So that means as we try to understand and read the story of the early church, and we'll just cover the materials that are relevant to the church from the Gospels, 4 different Gospels. And it itself will take a whole quarter to study. As I do the research on this subject of early church history, I thought, there's not much to cover. But as I study and investigate and research on the subject, the Acts of Apostle itself would be quite a material to cover, and the Gospel itself, it is quite a substantial materials in there to study. And also we need to cover the concepts of church as we try to discuss the church history. So those are the main things that we are trying to cover. Okay, let me introduce myself, and some of you already have taken a couple or more classes from me, but there are always new students, and I'd like to introduce myself, so to give some idea where I'm coming from and how I'm going to pursue this class. So, let's see. Okay. My name is Hwang, and I'm not sure if it's not working. That's how I write my name in Chinese characters. Hwang means yellow, and it's a common last name in China and Korea, of course. And then the Song, it means holiness, and Su means excellent or the outstanding. So my grandfather named me, who's been Christian from the North Korea, and he also served as an elder in a church for many years, and then he was, hoping and praying that I will be a pastor and minister. I kind of found out in the later days that he had made this pledge to God that He will dedicate me as a pastor or the minister. So here I am. I'm an ordained pastor, and actually a Southern Baptist, and I'm also a 1.5 Korean American minister. I mean, 1.5 generation means it's not a second generation who are born in America. It's not like a first generation immigrant who came to America as an adult. It's like in between. Most of 1.5 generation Korean American, they came at the age from like late elementary to high school age. So when you're brought to America by your parents and were educated junior high, high school in America, then you're most likely identified as 1.5 generation. And these are the kids that I worked with, and I'm still working with this younger generation. I have not actually worked with any like adult congregation other than just providing some training and seminars, but I never had the adult generation as my congregation. I worked with the high schoolers, junior high schoolers, and then also the college kids, and then young adults. These are the main people or members of my congregation. And also, diaspora is a big theme in my life. I've been diasporaed to Africa for when I was in high school. I moved to Africa, and it's a French-speaking Africa. You may not familiar with this country. It's right in the middle, Central African Republic, which is, right in the middle of Africa, and I was there for like 5 years, and I've finished the high school there. So I'm myself a 1.5 generation, born in Korea, educated until high school, then went to another country, another culture for different cultural experience and education. So I do understand what the 1.5 generation is like, and what are some issues and problems, and identity, for example. Identity is very difficult for 1.5 generation people. Then I went back to Korea for the college education, and then I was involved in a campus ministry called InterVarsity, which is it's a well-known campus ministry, almost 200 years of history. And then later I came to America to further study for my seminary education. So that's a very brief life story, narrative of mine. And as an instructor in a college, you need to have certain credentials for these rather high post high school or post secondary education. And I graduated from Yonsei University in Seoul, which is one of the well-known and highly ranking university in Korea. Then after graduating from Yonsei University, I attended Asian Center for Theological Studies and Missions. And then for the theological seminary, I've done some master's level work there, and also done some doctoral studies in Fuller Theological Seminary. Actually, I've been instructed by Robert Clinton, who is pretty much famous scholar in Christian leadership, and I've done some doctoral level study there on leadership. And I also attended the Golden Gate Theological Seminary for graduate, undergraduate work, master's, and then done a PhD study in William Carey International University in Pasadena. There's another school by William Carey, but this is a different one in Pasadena. So that's my basic education. So during this course of studies, of course, I've taken several classes on church history, and that would qualify me, at least be able to give some instructions on the very primary and basic introduction and knowledge to the topic of early church history. Okay, that's about it. And yeah, if this wasn't a virtual class, that I would have asked you to, have some questions about me, and I would have loved to answer those questions. But this being just one-way instruction, sorry about that, but having this pandemic still going on, this is probably the best that we can do. So I hope and pray that we'll see you guys soon in the classroom, face to face, and give instructions. Yeah, and hope that will be soon, summer or at least the fall. Okay. Hoping that that will be our opportunity to see each other, and let's continue with our instruction. For this class, the requirements are a little lighter than the actual face-to-face class due to the much limitations that given with this virtual class. And but the attendance is the must. Since you're able to view this at home and on the time of your choice and the place, I want you to be 100% attendance on this. So try not to miss any of this class, because the nature of class is being a history. You don't want to miss certain part of history, because all the history is related, and as we continue to give instruction, you don't want to miss any of those, because you will be handicapped, quite handicapped, if you miss a class or two. So attendance is the must. And then there are some readings that I require you to read, because in the college level class of this level, which will be I believe this is a 300 level class. It requires 1,000 to 1,600 pages of reading, generally, and then reviews. If this were the face-to-face class, it would have some quiz and test and so on, and a final exam. But due to limitation in a virtual situation, there certain reviews that we need to do, and we'll try to be creative on this. Okay, these are a couple books to read by. Both books are by F.F. Bruce, which is well known and famous, and I mean his kind of standard in any theological schools. You are going to be recommended or required to read these books when you're doing the early church history. First one, New Testament history by F.F. Bruce. This basically covers what we are covering in this class. It covers the gospel and then story in Acts, the Acts of the apostles. So that's the primary and the basic and the fundamental textbook that we are going to use. And other than this workbook that we have, I'm sure that you guys have these, and these are like outlines of my instructions, and we'll go by this. Not exactly 100%, but the same, but most likely follow that outline that given in that textbook. And I mean the guide. Okay, then second book to read is The Spreading Flame. So the Bruce is kind of comparing the spread of Christianity, the gospel, to the spread of flame. If you live in Southern California, you are familiar with this wildfire. Yeah. So early church history is like a wildfire, which is out of control. So that image is very correct. The rise and the progress of Christianity from its first beginning, so very first beginning, to the conversion of the English. So it covers basically to the early church history to England, which is only fifth century, most likely. So that's the second textbook, but we are going to use the first part, probably 1/3 of that second textbook. So you don't need to read the whole book, but almost a third portion of that book. Okay. So lesson 1, the part 1. Actually, part 1. There are a couple lessons in the part 1. Introducing the new narratives. This is a very spiritual narrative. Spiritual narrative meaning that, all the human beings on earth, whether they are rich or poor, whether they are, Democrat or Republicans, whether they're in the free world or not so free world, whether you're socialist, communist, or whatever. Even if you're another religious person, there's a spiritual narrative that each individual goes through. Actually, your whole life narrative is a spiritual narrative. And the human generation in general, and with the overall, history, we do experience a spiritual narrative. Though many historians do see history from their secular, so-called secular perspectives. Us believers, whether you're Christian, Muslim, or Buddhist, us those who are religious, we are looking at the history, whether individual or whole human generation, looking at history with a spiritual perspective. Meaning, there is someone who is behind the history that he or she, for the matter, these power behind, they do, sometimes some believe they control, some believe they involve, some believe they interact with the human generation to create this long narrative. It's not like a never-ending narrative. Hinduism. In Hinduism, it's like a never-ending narrative. In Buddhism, pretty much it's similar. But in Christianity and Muslim and Judaism, it's a story that has an end. So that's a kind of different perspective. We'll go into these perspectives later on. But the new narrative, I say, there's an old narrative and new narrative from a Christian perspective, or even Judaic, Muslim. They stay with that old narrative. And then us Christians, we believe in a new narrative. So that's the main difference. For Muslim and Judaism, they still continue with that old narrative. From their perspective, especially in Judaism, for example, they believe in Messiah. I mean, the Orthodox, traditional, fundamental Jews, they still believe in coming Messiah. From their perspective, the Messiah has not been here on earth yet. It is something that to be happen. I'm not so expert on the Muslim or Islam faith, but I assume that the Muhammad, the great Muhammad, he is the last and the best prophet. That means the Messiah has not been accomplished. I mean, so they still believe. From my understanding, both Islam faith and Judaic faith, they still waiting for the Messiah. So they remain with old narrative. But for us Christians, this is a new narrative, because the Messiah has been there already amongst us, amongst a human generation, into the human history. So that's like a new beginning, and there is a new narrative. That's why the title is Introducing the New Narrative. And the gospel story, 4 gospels written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These are 4 disciples of Jesus Christ, whom us Christians believe as the Messiah, the chosen one, the anointed one. So we believe that, and then these 4 disciples written their own story about this Messiah. They have experienced, they lived and ate with this Messiah for almost 3 years, or little less or more, depending on who's interpreting the gospel. Anyway, so these 4 figures written about the story of Jesus, the Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Mary and John. So they are, Mary and Joseph, sorry, not John. So Joseph and Mary of Nazareth, they bear a child, and the child was born and raised in the town of Nazareth, and he later becomes the Messiah. And he is the one who begins this narrative. And according to these 4 different authors who claim to witness the works and the life of Messiah, they recorded, like a 20 chapters or more or less about the story about Jesus. So that's narrative. So history is a narrative. Narrative, it has character, it has episode. With the character and episode, every narrative, if it's a narrative, it's a good narrative, it will have lessons and the meanings and implications. Because anyone who's writing or telling a narrative, he or she has a message or messages in that narrative. You're not spending time and energy and effort to just, say things. When that happens, it's not a narrative, we say it's a chat. Chat is just, saying things. Gibberish. Blah, blah, blah. That's not narrative. It's just, lot of words, meaningless. In Korean we call suda. But narrative, it does have certain intention. Intention, in other words, a purpose or goals. When someone says this, and that we call a narrative. It's a story. Story is a narrative. So, we live within these stories. The dramas, movies, and the books, the novel, the stories. And we grew up as a child listening to these narratives. Those storybooks. Those are the narratives. And stories by Aesop, the writer of children's stories. I believe he's Greek. Okay, and these are the narratives. So that's a very brief introduction to narrative, but you need to. This is a key component in understanding history. What the narrative is. History is a narrative, and narrative becomes history. So why a new narrative? After 400 years, this 400 years is very important because according to the Bible, since this is Christian school, and since this is early church history, I'm coming from totally 100% from Christian perspective. There's nothing secular about my lecture, so please understand that viewpoint and the worldview and values that I have as a Christian and as a pastor and as a Christian instructor and professor. The things I say in this class and teach in this class are according to the Bible, strictly. So according to the Bible, there's the beginning. The very beginning, in the beginning. That's how the whole Bible starts. There's a beginning, and then the story of the creation. There's a story of the big flood. There's a story of Abraham, and there's a story of Isaac, and then Joseph, and so on. Then jump to the story of Moses. And then 40 years in the wilderness, they come back to the land of Palestine, and they begin their story of the nation of Israel. So there's King Saul, and there's King David, and then there's King Solomon, and then it divides into two countries, the north and south, just like the Korea is now, North Korea and South Korea, same thing in Israel. There's a Judah and Israel. And then they were attacked, invaded by both Assyria and Babylon, the superpower of the time, and the whole nation is gone. They become the captives, slaves to these big major power. Then later on, they become the colony of Roman Empire. So Assyria, Babylon, and Roman Empire, that's $400 years of silence. So God has not spoken for 400 years until the Messiah comes. So that's kind of old narrative and new narrative. 400 years in between. That's kind of, intermission. And when you go to, the musical concert, there's something called intermission between the first part and the second part. Pretty much similar. There's the first part of spiritual narrative from, our Christian perspective. Then there's a second narrative that begins. So why don't we stop here and take a break, and we'll begin the latter part. We'll continue with it. Okay, let's have a little break. Hi. Okay. We are with the second part of the first week on the early church history. Well, let's continue. So, why new narrative? We just discussed about this 400 silent years. God has not spoken. There's no prophets between here and there until John the Baptist. You need to remember, John the Baptist is the first prophet, and then second to the last. Jesus being the last prophet. And there's not going to be no more prophet later on. So he's the Messiah. Jesus is the Messiah. He's the prophet, and he's the priest. He's the king. So the Messiah has these three different roles. That's another discussion in the Christology. But so we have 400 years. Then we have a new narrative, which is called New Testament. New Testament. The New Testament means a new covenant. Covenant Testament, another word is new promise. So Old Testament means old promise or old covenant between God and Israel. That's God and Israel in the Old Testament. For the New Testament, and God and His people. God and His people, God and His people. But in the Old Testament, His people is limited to Jews. Why Jews? That's another long discussion, so we'll just skip it here. But God has chosen Jews. He could have chosen other kind of ethnic group, but He has made choice to choose Jews to be His people in the Old Testament. Then again, as His people, God's people, in the New Testament, this is a new promise, new covenant between God and His people. So what's the difference? After 400 years, there's Jesus Christ, who has died on the cross, on that very cross, to save the people who believe in that cross, that the power of resurrection, the power of atonement. Atonement means forgiving, the cleaning of sins. And the whole process of these rituals, cleaning of sins, righteousness, and sanctification, all these difficult words, the theological doctrinal words are for it's relationship, new relationship. So Jesus becomes that agent in between like a middle person between God and His people. So whoever comes to Jesus will be connected or related or accepted by the God the Father, God the mighty Creator. So that's basically what we believe as Christians. It's simple enough, that very truth. But there are a lot more than that in details. But simply, that's after 400 years of silence, God begins to speak through John the Baptist. So John the Baptist comes in, and the Jesus Christ, creates a new entity called church. Okay, now here's the introduction of church. So new entity, new identity of his people, God's people. So God's people, many of them who believe in God through Jesus Christ, and that's a new entity called church. And because it's a new entity, it's like when you have a new business, you say you have old business of selling, let's say bread, okay, bread. And then new entity means this is a new business. You're selling spaghetti. So that's a new entity, new business, and a new mandate. New mandate. So mandate means responsibility or job. So you have a new job because it's a new narrative. There's an old narrative and there's a new narrative. And we are trying to cover that very beginning of new narrative, which is most likely it's about 30, 40 years at the most. So this class that we are going to continue for remaining 9 weeks is going to cover this very short period of time. Even though this is very short, it's very important period of history. When we talk about time, there's in Greek, the Greek word Greece language, Greek language. There's a chrono and depending on which spelling, there's a chrono and kairos. Chrono is the scientific time, minute and hours, and any where any time it is the same. It doesn't have meanings. Chrono is a time without meaning, without any labeling. On the other hand, kairos is the time that has significance, the meaning. For example, a birthday is just like any other day for any other people. But for you, when it's your birthday, it's special because it has certain meaning to it. That's what the narrative is. For others, that's not narrative. Today is the same day as yesterday for many people. But if it's your birthday, today has some significant meaning to you in your life, and that becomes narrative, and it's kairos. Kairos is meaningful time, or time with certain significance and meaning, and it's special, it's distinctive. And this 30 and 40 years that are covered in the four Gospels, and especially in this four Gospels, the 3 years of Jesus' so-called public life or public ministry is 90% of gospel is written on that 3-4 years, and it's key and it's critical to early church history that we are going to cover. So the readings, relevant readings from the four Gospels regarding the early church history actually covers 3-4 years altogether. So new mandate, new, and try to remember this word kairos, because this is what we are trying to cover. Not any other time in the chronological data, but we're trying to focus on the time and the activity of Jesus Christ and his disciples, and how they laid foundation for the church of God, or church of Christ, or church of Holy Spirit. So again, church is Church of God the Father, Church of Son, the Jesus Christ, and the Church of the Holy Spirit. So that's how we understand the church. When we talk about church, that's what it is. Now, to discuss the history of church, I just introduced the term church with this new covenant, new entity. New entity is, again, here. New entity is called church. And there's some theological concept and definition of church. Because, this, I'm going to go... I'm going to go rather lengthy. Hold on a second. Lengthy on this theological concept and definition of church, because without understanding what the church is, you'll be confused when we talk about church history. So our church history, to discuss, we need to have an agreement about the concept of church, because today in this a very secular English, church can be used for many different things. Even it doesn't have to be a Christian to be called a church. Any religious group, they may call themselves church, and it is acceptable. I mean, not in terms of legal acceptance, but common. With the common language, general language definition, church has many different definitions and concepts than what is intended in the Bible. So the theological concept means, again, it's a biblical concept and the definition of church. So how Bible understand a church, that's how we are going to agree on as we try to discuss the concept of church. Okay. Etymology. Etymology is a key to good science. Good science. When I say science, it means logical, rational way of pursuing the things, or pursuing the questions, or addressing the problems and issues. That's science. So it doesn't have to be a natural science. Natural science is a part of science. Today, the word science is used for sociology and just other than arts. Literature is also a science in today's understanding. So any rational, logical, academic efforts, according to the modern, principle of knowledge, seeking the knowledge, would be called science. When you're doing a good science, if you're trying to do a good science, you always start with a good etymology, meaning the defining and understanding the word and the concept. You use the certain terms. A term or terms is the language that are used in science. That's the term. So to do good science, you need to define a term. And since we are doing a church history, and it's early, so we need to define all these three concepts. How early is early that we are trying to, and I just told you these are the early church history. So we already discussed how early is the early. I will have the same topic later on, but this is very introductory, definition of early. And then church history. So we begin with the church. Etymology usually covers the origin of the language, how this language has, or term has begun and developed. And it deals with the so-called semantics. So good etymology, you start with the origin, the very first use of that very term. Sometimes it's very specific, usually when we are doing a modern word. For example, computer. Computer, we have good data and very solid data, how this word came about and how it has been developed and changed. Development means change. So, good etymology, you have to have the good recorded history on the word itself. So the origin and change. Then we have something called the semantics. That's the word components. For example, my name, Yellow, the last name Yellow in China, that's originated from China, and I'm sure that some of my ancestors, they either borrow that last name from China, or actually some of them or one of them may came from China and used his last name after he came to move to Korea. We don't know exactly, but that's kind. just safe assumption. But that word Hwang, it means yellow, but the semantics says the word is used for the high-ranking class of people, like the emperor or someone who's close to emperor. So that means yellow and high-ranking. So those are like a semantics of the word. And connotation. Connotations are usually the branches of meaning. Sometimes as the same word term may have several different definitions or similar but different and distinctive and different connotations. So meanings or implications. So those are the some of the things that are related to the connotation. Okay, so these are like three different versions of the words that we may find. If you are a student of Christian studies or theology in a seminary, the first one, ecclesia, which is in Greek. Usually, you don't deal with the Greek anymore, but if you're a student of theology, you must know that meaning of ecclesia. I'll try to explain and go further into that word, but I'm just introducing the very concept. And then in Korea, and I believe in the China, we use that word, 교회. I don't know how you pronounce it in Chinese, but pretty similar. But in Korea, we say 교회. Means, first word, 교 means to teach, or the belief, system of belief. And 회, the second Chinese character, if you're Chinese, it means gathering or group. And then church in English, it's a little different, but it has that connotation or semantic of gathering or a group of religious group. And actually the church, the origin of the word means a place, a house, or building. So church in English is more like a place, gathering place, or the house or building. So each culture, they adopted their own concept, language to translate the very word of ecclesia. And that word, Greek word ecclesia, is, I didn't write here, but kahal in Hebrew or Aramaic, it means assembly or gathering or congregation in English translation. But in the Old Testament here, before the New Beginning, the Old Testament time, they used the kahal to indicate the group of people who are gathered under the name of Yahweh God, the biblical God or Hebrew God. So Yahweh and the kahal is very connected, associated. So the word, the kahal, is used when the people of Israel gathered to look toward or worship or listen to God. And in the record of Exodus or in Numbers or Deuteronomy, Moses stands as a prophet or the middle person between God and his people, and as a priesthood in between God and his people. And then that assembly, gathering of these Israel people, was called kahal, which is very similar to the word church. The word ecclesia. Ecclesia basically is a combination of two different words. So the connotation, it has two different connotations. One is to call, call. Say, come, to call. And then lesia, lesia means called, ek is from. So called from is the actual, the meaning, the semantic of that word ecclesia. So called from is the basic, the primary semantic of the word church in the English. So that's like etymology. We'll go further into the more detailed concept in the later discussion. But try to, this is how to show how each different culture and language has translated the Greek and the concept of Jewish Hebrew concept into their own language. The thing is, what I'm trying to say is, as we translate or replace the word, the original word, into your own language, the meanings does change or develop or evolve or change. Sometimes change for the good, sometimes change for less. Sometimes not better, but So 교회, the Chinese word, how the Korean, Japanese, and Chinese understand it is a little different than original word ecclesia. And the church, of course, it is different than ecclesia. Unless you're studying the this Greek word and this some Christian education, seminary education, then you do not know the church that means ecclesia. Okay, now we go into very fundamental understanding of the church, the theological, doctrinal, and biblical. What is church? How the Bible perceives and defines a church. And let's see, say Catholic Church doesn't mean the Catholic Church that we know today. That's different. So please do not confuse with the, Catholic Church with the Pope at Rome. That's even though they call themselves Catholic Church, but the exact name of the Catholic Church, official name, is not Catholic Church. So this is a theological wording of the church, Catholic Church. It means universal church. Universal church. So the church as the whole. From the beginning, maybe from the beginning to the end of history, which the Bible says that the last day, there's a last day, according to the Bible. The history is going to end somewhere. So in between, from here to here, or some say from Jesus to here. When you watch a movie, at the end, we say the end. Not anymore, but the old movies always end at the end. That is very significant, because that reminds us when we watch a movie, there's going to be the end of your life and the end to human history. So there's going to be the end. But from the beginning to the end, the church, the universal church, every believers that are counted. So we need to define the believer later on. But basically a believer is the one who truly, heartfully, genuinely trusted in Jesus Christ, trying to live a life according to Christ's teaching or biblical teaching. That's Christian. And those Christians who genuinely believed in Jesus Christ, thus who are being saved by the grace of God, the Father, he or she is a Christian. And this multitude of all believers from the beginning until the end, not one less or one more. There's an exact number. We do not know how many. Some cults, some sects, or some they believe there's only 14,400. No, 144,000. That's absurd. That's only to give the number 12, 120 times 120, which is perfection, and times perfection means the absolute perfection. So perfect number of believers. That's the whole universal church. This church is beyond time and space. And only God, the Father, knows how many are there. We do not know, and we cannot even count. There is no record. That there is no way that we may know that. But there are hundreds and hundreds, millions of believers who has been from the beginning till the end. And these are the eternal number, eternal church, and this is an absolute church. And this church is not visible, it's spiritual. You cannot, only God knows. So that's called Catholic Church or Universal Church in some other translation. And whole number of believers who are saved by the grace of God. And when we say biblical church, this is the church that we are talking about. And when we talk about this early church history, this is period of time, and that is the genuine believers in this period, they are part of this universal church. So when we talk about early church history, that's given time and space. But this Catholic Church is beyond that. So trying to understand the Catholic Church. If you still have some questions, and just look further into some other resources, and you may get more accurate definition. So I think time's up for today, and thank you, and I will see you next week. Thank you for listening, and see you later.